Blood painted a crimson trail behind Nora Fuller as she dragged herself across the harsh Wyoming terrain, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other clawing desperately at the earth beneath her. The year was 1878, and she had been left to die under the merciless June sun, her husband's final betrayal more painful than the bullet lodged in her shoulder. The distant silhouette of a ranch house wavered on the horizon like a mirage, seeming to retreat with every agonizing inch she gained. 3 days she'd been crawling, surviving on dew and determination, her unborn child the only reason her heart continued to beat. The baby kicked within her, a stubborn reminder that 2 lives hung in the balance. "Just a little further," she whispered, her parched lips cracking with each word. "We're almost there." The world spun around her as consciousness began to slip away. With one final, desperate lunge, Nora collapsed at the edge of a well-tended vegetable garden, the scent of fresh, turned earth filling her nostrils as darkness claimed her. Jake Jensen was returning from the north pasture when he spotted what appeared to be a bundle of rags at the edge of his property. His horse, Samson, nickered nervously as they approached. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip. 5 years in Black Hawk, Wyoming had taught him caution. "Easy, boy," he murmured to the stallion, dismounting with practiced grace despite his tall frame. What he discovered stole the breath from his lungs. Not rags, but a woman barely alive, her dress torn and bloodied, her golden hair matted with dirt and blood, and unmistakably pregnant. "Lord Almighty," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. His fingers found a faint pulse in her neck, and he noticed the wound in her shoulder, dried blood crusted around what was clearly a bullet hole. Without hesitation, Jake gathered the woman into his arms, alarmed at how light she felt despite her condition. He whistled for Samson, who trotted obediently to his side, and with careful movements, he mounted with the unconscious woman secured against his chest. "Hang on, madam," he said as they galloped toward the ranch house. "I've got you now." Inside his modest but well-kept home, Jake laid the woman on his bed and worked quickly to assess her injuries. 5 years of solitary ranching had made him self-sufficient in many ways, including tending wounds. The bullet had gone clean through her shoulder, which was both blessing and curse. Less risk of lead poisoning, but more blood loss. He cleaned the wound with whiskey and bandaged it tightly, then attended to her other scrapes and bruises. All the while, his mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? Who had shot her and left her to die? And how had she managed to crawl to his property in her condition? Her eyes fluttered open as he was wiping dirt from her face, revealing irises the color of summer storms. Fear immediately flooded those eyes, and she tried to pull away. "Easy now," Jake said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you." "My baby," she gasped, hands flying to her belly. "The baby seems fine," he assured her, though in truth he knew little about such matters. "You're both alive, which is something of a miracle considering what you've been through." Tears welled in her eyes. "He left me to die," she whispered. "Who did?" "My husband, Daniel." The words seemed to pain her as much as her physical wounds. "He shot me and left me for dead when I wouldn't go with the men he sold me to." Jake's jaw tightened at her words, a cold anger settling in his chest. "Sold you," she nodded weakly, "for gambling debts. Said they could have me after the baby comes." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Guess he got tired of waiting." "You're safe now," Jake repeated, his voice firm with conviction. "I'm Jake Jensen. This is my ranch. You and your child are under my protection for as long as you need." "Nora," she replied, her voice fading as exhaustion claimed her again. "Nora Fuller." Jake watched as she drifted back to unconsciousness, her breathing steadier now. Something protective and fierce awakened in him, something he hadn't felt since losing his family to cholera 5 years earlier. This woman and her unborn child needed him, and he found himself making a silent vow that no harm would come to them as long as he drew breath. For 3 days, Nora drifted in and out of consciousness. Jake kept careful watch, spooning broth between her lips when she was awake enough to swallow, bathing her forehead with cool cloths when fever took hold. He sent his ranch hand, an older man named Elijah, to fetch the doctor from town, but the physician had been called away to a mining accident further north. "You're doing all anyone could," Elijah assured him, eyeing the sleeping woman with grandfatherly concern. "Doc Williams said he'd come as soon as he returns." On the morning of the 4th day, Jake awoke in the chair beside the bed to find Nora watching him, her eyes clearer than they had been since her arrival. "You stayed," she said simply. Jake straightened, running a hand through his dark hair. "Of course. Most men wouldn't care for a woman in my condition, especially one they didn't know." "I'm not most men," he replied, rising to pour her a cup of water. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot and left to die," she said with unexpected wryness, accepting the water gratefully. After drinking, she added more softly, "Thank you for saving us." Jake nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Can you tell me what happened? The full story if you're up to it." Nora sighed, one hand absently stroking her rounded belly. "My husband Daniel and I came west from Pennsylvania 2 years ago. He had dreams of striking it rich in the gold fields, but all he really found was liquor and card games." Her eyes darkened with remembered pain. "When I told him I was expecting, I thought it might change him, make him take life more seriously. Instead, he disappeared for days at a time, returning only to demand money or steal what few valuables we had." She paused, gathering strength before continuing. "3 days ago, or maybe it's been longer now, he returned with 2 men. Rough types. They were talking about me like I wasn't there, discussing what would happen after delivery. I realized Daniel had wagered me in a game and lost. They were going to wait until the baby came, then take me." Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I refused to go with them, told Daniel I'd rather die. He said that could be arranged and pulled his pistol. I didn't think he'd actually." Her voice broke. "The men got nervous about murder and fled. Daniel panicked and ran too, leaving me bleeding on the floor of our cabin about 10 miles east of here. I waited until dark, then started crawling. I knew there were ranches in this direction." 10 miles. Jake couldn't hide his astonishment. "You crawled 10 miles. While wounded and pregnant." Nora met his gaze steadily. "I had something to live for," she said, her hand still cradling her belly. In that moment, Jake felt something shift inside him, admiration blooming into something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. "Your husband," he said carefully. "Will he come looking for you?" A shadow crossed her face. "Only if he thinks there's something to gain. He believes I'm dead or soon will be." "Good," Jake said grimly. "Let's keep it that way for now. You need to rest and heal." Over the next week, Nora's strength gradually returned. The wound in her shoulder began to heal cleanly, thanks to Jake's careful tending and the eventual visit from Doc Williams, who pronounced both mother and child remarkably resilient. "That baby's determined to make it into this world," the doctor said with a smile as he packed his bag to leave. "And with a mother like this, I'd expect nothing less." Jake walked the doctor to his horse. "What about the birth?" he asked quietly. "It's coming soon, isn't it?" Doc Williams nodded. "A few weeks at most, I'd say. She'll need help, Jensen. I'll try to be here, but with the territories being what they are." "I understand," Jake said, though the prospect of helping deliver a baby terrified him far more than facing down rustlers or wild animals. There's a widow in town, Martha Holloway. She's helped with many births. I'll send her out when the time comes." As the doctor rode away, Jake returned to find Nora sitting up in bed, attempting to comb through her tangled hair with her fingers. Without thinking, he retrieved a brush from a drawer and handed it to her. "It was my sister's," he explained when she looked at him questioningly. "She lived here with me for a while after I first settled this place." "And now?" Nora asked, accepting the brush gratefully. "She married a shopkeeper in Cheyenne 3 years ago." A fond smile softened his features. "Has 2 little ones of her own now." Nora began working the brush through her hair, wincing as it caught on knots. After watching her struggle for a moment, Jake surprised himself by asking, "Would you like some help with that?" The question seemed to surprise her equally. After a brief hesitation, she nodded and handed him the brush. Jake sat on the edge of the bed and gently began working the tangles from her golden hair, starting at the ends as he'd seen his sister do. The simple, intimate act created a comfortable silence between them. "You mentioned once that you're not like most men," Nora said finally. "I believe that's true." Jake continued his careful brushing. "My pa raised me and my sister after our mother died. He believed in treating all folks with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. Said a man should be judged by how he treats those who can offer him nothing in return." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Jake said, the familiar ache of loss tempering his voice. "Taught me everything I know about ranching, about life. Lost him and my wife and son to cholera 5 years back, just after we arrived here to start fresh." Nora turned to face him, her expression softening with shared understanding of grief. "I'm so sorry, Jake." He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy but unwilling to dwell on the past. "This ranch was our dream. After losing them, I nearly gave it up. But then I figured the best way to honor them was to make it work." "And have you?" she asked. "Made it work, getting there," he replied with a small smile. "The cattle are healthy, crops are good. Built this house with my own hands. It's not much, but it's mine." "It's a fine home," Nora said sincerely. "Feels safer than any place I've lived since leaving Pennsylvania." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps, or the beginnings of trust. The moment was interrupted by a sharp kick from Nora's baby, visible even through her nightgown. She laughed, a sound Jake realized he hadn't heard from her before. "Someone's awake," she said, placing her hand where the movement had been. Without thinking, she reached for Jake's hand and placed it alongside hers. Jake felt the strong kick against his palm and couldn't help the wonder that spread across his face. He had missed this experience with his own child, having been away working when his wife was carrying their son. "Strong," he murmured, oddly moved by the sensation. "Like his mother," Nora said with quiet pride. "You think it's a boy?" She tilted her head thoughtfully. "I'm not certain. Sometimes I think boy, sometimes girl. Either way, this child is a fighter." Her expression grew solemn. "I need to be ready to support us, Jake. I can't impose on your kindness forever." "You're not imposing," he replied firmly. "And you're in no condition to be making plans beyond resting and preparing for this baby." "I won't be a charity case," she insisted. "I can work. I'm good with numbers. I kept books for my father's store back east. And I can cook, sew, garden." Jake considered her words. In truth, the ranch could use a good bookkeeper. His own record-keeping was haphazard at best, and with the operation growing, it was becoming a problem. "Let's make a deal," he said finally. "You focus on healing and bringing that baby safely into the world. After that, if you still want to stay on, we can discuss you helping with the books and whatever else suits you. This place could use a woman's touch, and I'd pay you fair wages." Relief washed over Nora's face. "That's more than generous." It's practical, Jake countered, though they both recognized it as more than that. It was the beginning of a partnership neither had anticipated. As July blazed across the Wyoming territory, Nora's presence transformed the Jensen ranch in subtle ways. Though still recovering and heavily pregnant, she insisted on contributing where she could. Jake would return from working the land to find fresh bread on the table, or his previously Spartan home brightened with wildflowers gathered from near the house. They fell into an easy routine, sharing meals and conversation. Jake found himself telling her about his daily work, about his plans for the ranch, things he hadn't shared with another soul since losing his family. In turn, Nora spoke of her life before Daniel, her childhood in Pennsylvania, her dreams of someday becoming a teacher. What happened? Jake asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. To those dreams of teaching, Nora's smile turned wistful. Daniel happened. I was young, 19, and flattered by the attention of a handsome man with big plans. My parents didn't approve. They saw through him from the start, but I was determined to prove them wrong. And now I know they were right about him, she admitted, but I don't regret the journey that led me here. She looked down at her belly. It gave me this child. And it brought me to this place. Her words hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to acknowledge. The peaceful routine they had established was shattered one afternoon in late July, when Jake spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the east. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle propped against the porch post as he called for Nora to stay inside. 3 riders emerged from the dust, rough-looking men who pulled up short when they saw Jake waiting, rifle in hand. Jake recognized their type immediately, troublemakers looking for opportunity. "Afternoon," the lead rider called, his false friendliness not reaching his eyes. "We're looking for a woman. Pregnant, blonde, might be injured, name's Nora Fuller." Jake's expression remained impassive. "What business you got with her? Her husband's mighty concerned," the man replied with a smile that made Jake's skin crawl. "Poor man's been searching everywhere since she wandered off. Not right in the head, you understand. Pregnancy's affected her mind." "That's so." Jake shifted slightly, ensuring he had a clear shot if needed. From inside the house, Nora listened with her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see the men clearly, the same 2 who had been with Daniel that fateful day. Which meant Daniel had sent them to find her, or worse, was somewhere nearby himself. "We'd be obliged if you'd tell us if you've seen her," the spokesman continued. "Her husband's offering a reward." "Haven't seen any pregnant women wandering these parts," Jake replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to attend to." The men exchanged glances. "Mind if we water our horses? Been a long ride." "Trough is over there," Jake nodded toward the corral. "Help yourselves, then be on your way." The men dismounted and led their horses to the trough. As they did, the spokesman casually asked, "You live here alone, Mr. Jensen?" Jake supplied his name coolly. "And no, got 3 hands who work this place with me. They're due back any minute." It was a bluff. Elijah was his only hand and he'd gone to town for supplies. But the men didn't need to know that. As the horses drank, one of the men wandered closer to the house, peering at the windows. Jake stepped deliberately into his path. "Your horse is over there," he said pointedly. The man smirked but rejoined his companions. After a final appraising look at the ranch house, they mounted up. "If you do happen to see Mrs. Fuller," the leader said, "tell her Daniel is eager to have her back home where she belongs." "I'll keep that in mind," Jake replied, not lowering his rifle until the riders disappeared into the distance. Inside, Nora was trembling. When Jake entered, he found her clutching a kitchen knife, her face pale with fear. "They're gone," he assured her, gently taking the knife from her hand. But they'll be back, won't they? She nodded miserably. They were the same men. Daniel must have sent them to find me. Jake ran a hand through his hair, thinking rapidly. We need to report this to the sheriff in Black Hawk. Daniel shot you, that's attempted murder. It would be my word against his, Nora said bitterly, and those men will surely lie for him. Then we'll need to be prepared, Jake decided. I won't let them take you, Nora, I promise you that. The next day, Jake rode to town to speak with Sheriff Mills, a grizzled veteran of the frontier who had known Jake since he first arrived in the territory. The sheriff listened gravely to Jake's account of finding Nora and the subsequent visit from the three men. I know the type, Mills said, stroking his mustache thoughtfully. This Daniel Fuller, he's not from around here. No, Jake confirmed. Nora said they came from Pennsylvania about 2 years ago, settled east of here initially. I'll ask around, see if anyone knows anything about him or those men. The sheriff leaned forward. In the meantime, you be careful, Jensen. Men desperate enough to shoot a pregnant woman aren't likely to be deterred by moral considerations. I'm counting on legal ones, Jake replied grimly. I want to file a homestead claim on behalf of Mrs. Fuller. Her husband abandoned her, left her for dead. Under territorial law, that constitutes abandonment, doesn't it? Sheriff Mills raised an eyebrow. It does indeed, but such claims usually take time to process. Time we may not have, Jake acknowledged, but I want it on record that she's under my protection legally as well as physically. The sheriff studied Jake's determined expression. You've taken quite an interest in this woman's welfare. She crawled 10 miles with a bullet wound while carrying a child, Jake said simply. She deserves a chance at a better life. Mills nodded slowly. I'll file the paperwork today. And Jensen, watch your back. Claim or no claim, men like that don't respect the law. True to the sheriff's warning, trouble wasn't long in coming. 3 days later, Jake was repairing fencing in the north pasture when he heard a gunshot from the direction of the ranch house. He mounted Samson instantly, galloping back with his heart in his throat. As he crested the rise overlooking his property, he saw a familiar figure standing on his porch, rifle raised Elijah. The old ranch hand was facing off against 5 mounted men, including the 3 who had visited previously. Jake approached from behind the group, his own rifle ready. Gentlemen, he called coldly, you appear to be trespassing. The men wheeled their horses around, startled by his appearance. In their midst, Jake recognized a new face that had to be Daniel Fuller, a handsome man with a weak chin and eyes that darted nervously between Jake and the house. This doesn't concern you, Jensen, said the leader of the previous visit. We've come for Fuller's wife, and we mean to have her. Mrs. Fuller is under my protection, Jake replied, his voice carrying the dangerous calm of a man prepared to kill. And she's filed abandonment papers against her husband. You have no claim here. Daniel Fuller sputtered indignantly. She's my wife, my property. She stopped being either when you put a bullet in her and left her to die, Jake said, his rifle unwavering. Sheriff Mills is expecting me in town tomorrow. If I don't arrive, he'll come looking with a posse. It was another bluff, but delivered with such conviction that uncertainty flickered across the men's faces. Additionally, Jake continued, I've filed a formal complaint against all of you for trespassing on my property with intent to commit kidnapping. Now, you can leave peacefully, or you can see how many of you still have functioning limbs after my man Elijah and I start shooting. Elijah, taking his cue, cocked his rifle with deliberate menace. The standoff stretched for several tense heartbeats before Daniel Fuller broke first. This isn't over, he snarled, wheeling his horse around. For your sake it had better be, Jake warned. Next time you set foot on my land, I won't be asking questions first. They watched as the men rode away, maintaining their vigilance until the last dust cloud disappeared. "You think they're gone for good?" Elijah asked, finally lowering his rifle. "No," Jake admitted grimly. "But they'll think twice before coming back." Inside, they found Nora in the bedroom, a small derringer clutched in her trembling hands. Jake recognized it as one he kept in a drawer. She must have found it while cleaning. "I heard the shot," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her obvious fear. "Warning shot from Elijah," Jake explained, gently taking the derringer. "Your husband was with them this time." Nora closed her eyes briefly. "He won't stop, will he?" "He will," Jake promised. "One way or another." That night, after Elijah had retired to the bunkhouse, Jake and Nora sat at the kitchen table discussing their limited options. "We could leave," Nora suggested. "I've already brought enough trouble to your door." Jake shook his head firmly. "This is my home. I won't be driven from it by men like that. Besides," he added with a gentle smile, "you're in no condition to travel, and that baby could decide to arrive any day now." As if on cue, Nora gasped suddenly, her hands flying to her belly. "What is it?" Jake asked, alarmed. "I think," she said with a mixture of wonder and fear, "that the baby might have heard you." Within the hour, it became clear that Nora's labor had begun. Jake sent Elijah galloping toward town to fetch both Dr. Williams and the midwife, Martha Holloway, while he helped Nora prepare as best he could with his limited knowledge. "I'm scared, Jake," Nora admitted as another contraction gripped her. "What if something goes wrong? What if Daniel comes back while I'm like this?" Jake took her hand firmly in his. "Nothing will go wrong, and if Daniel or anyone else tries to get to you, they'll have to come through me first. I promised I wouldn't let you go, and I meant it." The labor progressed steadily through the night. Martha Holloway arrived just before dawn, her capable presence immediately bringing a sense of order to the chaotic situation. Dr. Williams followed an hour later, by which time Nora's contractions were coming fast and strong. Jake found himself pacing the porch, wincing at each cry of pain from inside. The sound transported him back 5 years to another birth, his son's, which had ended with both mother and child slipping away despite the doctor's best efforts. The memory of that loss was almost physically painful. "Mr. Jensen," Martha called from the doorway, her apron stained with evidence of her work. "Mrs. Fuller is asking for you." Surprised, Jake entered the bedroom where Nora lay, her face flushed and hair dampened with sweat. She reached for his hand immediately. "Stay," she pleaded, her eyes bright with pain and determination. "I need your strength." Jake looked questioningly at Dr. Williams, who nodded slightly. "She's nearly there. If your presence comforts her, then by all means." And so Jake found himself holding Nora's hand as she brought new life into the world, her strength and courage in the face of such pain humbling him completely. When the first cry of the infant pierced the room, tears sprang unexpectedly to his eyes. "A boy," Dr. Williams announced, placing the squalling infant on Nora's chest after cutting the cord. "A healthy boy." Nora gazed down at her son with a look of such pure love that Jake felt his chest constrict with emotion. Without thinking, he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You did it," he whispered. "You're both safe now." As Martha cleaned and swaddled the baby, Nora kept her eyes on Jake. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since he first found her at the edge of his property. But exhaustion soon claimed Nora, and she drifted into much-needed sleep with her son nestled securely beside her. Jake stepped outside into the bright August morning, his heart fuller than it had been in years. Elijah approached, curiosity evident in his weathered face. "A boy," Jake told him, unable to keep the smile from his voice. "Healthy and strong like his mother." "Well now," Elijah said with satisfaction. "That's fine news. And speaking of news—" He handed Jake a telegram that had arrived from Sheriff Mills while the birth was underway. Jake read it quickly, his expression hardening. "Daniel Fuller's been arrested in Cheyenne for assault and attempted robbery. Mills says he'll likely face prison time." "That's a stroke of luck," Elijah observed. "Not luck," Jake corrected. "Justice." In the days that followed, Nora and her son, whom she named Joseph, after her father settled into life at the Jensen ranch with surprising ease. Jake found himself captivated by the tiny boy, watching in wonder as Joseph's features became more defined, revealing hints of Nora in his determined little chin and bright eyes. One evening, as Jake sat on the porch whittling a small wooden horse for Joseph, Nora joined him, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, "about the future." Jake set aside his carving, giving her his full attention. "And what thoughts have you had? Daniel will eventually be released from prison. When he is, he might come looking for us again. By then," Jake said carefully, "your abandonment claim will be fully processed. He'll have no legal right to you or Joseph." Nora nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "There's another possibility I've considered." Jake waited, sensing she needed to find her own words. "I could remarry," she said finally, turning to meet his eyes directly. "A new husband would remove any lingering claim Daniel might assert." Jake felt his heartbeat quicken. "That would indeed be a practical solution," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Do you have someone in mind for this arrangement?" A smile tugged at the corners of Nora's mouth. "I believe I do. Someone who has proven himself honorable and kind. Someone who promised not to let me go." Jake set his whittling aside and moved to sit beside her on the porch swing. "Nora," he said gently, "are you asking me to marry you?" "I suppose I am," she replied, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Though I understand if you see me only as someone to protect, or if your heart still belongs to your late wife." Jake silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. "My heart has been healing," he told her honestly. "And lately, it's been filling with new feelings for you and for this little one." He touched Joseph's tiny hand, which immediately curled around his finger. "But I need to know, is this proposal merely practical, or is there more to it?" Nora's eyes shimmered with emotion. "It began as gratitude," she admitted, "but it's grown into something much deeper. I've come to care for you, Jake Jensen, in ways I never expected, in ways I never knew were possible." Jake's hand moved to cup her cheek. "Then yes," he said simply. "I would be honored to marry you, Nora Fuller, not just to protect you, but because I've fallen in love with you." The admission, spoken aloud for the first time, seemed to release something in both of them. Nora leaned forward, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and promising a beginning rather than an end. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who passed through Black Hawk monthly. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by Elijah, Dr. Williams, Martha Holloway, and Sheriff Mills, who brought news that Daniel Fuller had been sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison. "You won't have to worry about him for a good long while," the sheriff assured them at the modest celebration afterward. "And even then, the law's on your side now." As summer turned to autumn, the Jensen ranch flourished under their combined care. Nora's skill with numbers proved invaluable for the business side of the operation, while Jake's expertise with cattle and crops ensured their physical prosperity. But the true wealth of their lives lay in the growing bond between them, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared struggles, and deepening love. Joseph grew quickly, a happy baby with his mother's golden hair and what Jake insisted was a cowboy's natural instinct for animals. Whenever Jake returned from working the range, The boy would wiggle with excitement, little arms reaching for the man he would come to know as his father in every way that mattered. On a crisp October evening, as they sat before the fireplace with Joseph sleeping contentedly in a cradle Jake had crafted, Nora looked around the room that had once been Jake's alone, but now bore the unmistakable touches of family life: a quilt here, a vase of dried flowers there, toys scattered about. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed," she said, leaning against Jake's shoulder. "6 months ago, I was crawling across the prairie, certain I would die." Jake's arm tightened around her. "I still have nightmares about what might have happened if you hadn't made it to my land." "But I did," she reminded him. "And you kept your promise. You never let me go." "And I never will," he vowed, sealing the promise with a kiss that spoke of passion and permanence alike. Winter brought heavy snows to the Wyoming territory, but the Jensen household remained warm with the heat of hearth and heart. Christmas was celebrated with simple gifts and profound gratitude, the holiday taking on new meaning through Joseph's wide-eyed wonder at the decorated pine tree Jake had hauled in from the forest. As they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom that night, Nora traced the strong lines of Jake's face with gentle fingers. "I have a Christmas gift I couldn't wrap," she whispered. "One that won't arrive for about 7 months. Jake's eyes widened as her meaning registered. "You're certain?" Nora nodded, her smile visible even in the dim light. "Martha confirmed it yesterday. Our family is growing again." Jake gathered her close, his joy too great for words. The life they were building together, unexpected, unplanned, but somehow meant to be continued to unfold with each passing day. From the deepest tragedy had come the greatest blessing, proving that even in the wild and often cruel territory, love could take root and flourish. Spring arrived with renewal in every direction: calves in the pastures, crops sprouting in the fields, and Nora's belly beginning to round with their coming child. On the anniversary of the day Jake had found her at the edge of his property, they rode together to the spot, Joseph secure in his father's arms. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Nora mused, looking at the now familiar landscape. "I was so desperate, so afraid." "You were the bravest person I've ever known," Jake told her. "Still are." They dismounted and Jake produced a small sapling from his saddlebag. "I thought we might plant this here," he explained. "A living marker of new beginnings." Together they dug the hole and settled the young oak tree into the Wyoming soil. As they worked, Joseph babbled happily, playing with the grass and wildflowers sprouting around them. "When he's older, we'll tell him the story," Jake said, patting the earth firmly around the sapling's roots. "About his remarkable mother who refused to give up, who crawled to safety against impossible odds." Nora smiled, one hand on her growing belly, the other reaching for Jake's. "And about the cowboy with the kind heart who saved us both and never let us go again." "Never," Jake affirmed, pulling her gently into his arms. "Not for all my days." Their lips met as the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass around them, a promise of futures unfolding, of love enduring, of a family built from the ashes of what once was into something stronger and more beautiful than either could have imagined on that fateful day 1 year before. The years passed with the rhythm of seasons on the Jensen ranch. Joseph grew from a toddler to a boy with his mother's quick mind and his father's steady nature. His sister Emma, born the following winter, inherited Jake's dark hair and Nora's storm-gray eyes, along with a determination that surprised no one who knew the family's history. By the time Joseph turned 5, the Jensen ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the territory. Jake's careful stewardship of the land, combined with Nora's shrewd business sense, created a legacy that would sustain their family for generations to come. The small sapling they had planted grew stronger each year, its roots reaching deep into the Wyoming soil, much like the family whose beginning it commemorated. Word reached them occasionally about Daniel Fuller. He served his full sentence, then drifted further west, apparently having learned the wisdom of leaving the Jensens in peace. Sheriff Mills, who remained a faithful friend to the family, reported that Fuller had been seen in California, where rumors suggested he had found gold after all, though too late to matter to the woman and child he had once discarded. On Joseph's 6th birthday, as family and friends gathered to celebrate at the ranch, Jake found Nora standing alone on the porch, watching the children playing in the yard. Joseph, Emma, and several others from neighboring ranches. "Happy thoughts?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "The happiest," she confirmed, leaning into his embrace. "I was just thinking how different today might have been if not for you." Jake shook his head slightly. "If not for your courage," he corrected. "You saved yourself, Nora, you and Joseph. I was just fortunate enough to be the one who found you." She turned in his arms, her eyes reflecting the deep love that had only strengthened through the years of partnership, parenthood, and shared dreams. "We saved each other," she said simply. "And that's the story I want our children to remember, that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the greatest light, if we're brave enough to keep crawling toward it." Jake's kiss was his answer, tender with remembrance of their beginning, rich with the fullness of their present, and bright with the promise of all the tomorrows they would face together, never letting go.